Everybody, welcome. Your saltwater guide, Captain Dave Hansen. We have a great guest today. My friend Tom Rowland's going to be joining us. He's got one heck of a story. He's been in this industry for a very, very long time. But first, I want to thank Deckhand Sports. Without our great sponsors, and Deckhand Sports is one of our great sponsors, without them, we can't do these shows. We can't do these shows live. It takes a bunch. It takes a village to do the show live. So thank you very much, Dave, and everybody over at Deckhand Sports. We'll show you a cool little video here in a little bit of the new Deckhand Sports air coffin for all your fish. We'll show that to you in a little bit. But hey, without any further ado, let's get Tom in here, Elliot, and get this show on the road. Hey, Tom, good morning or good afternoon or good evening.
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm super good. I'm just getting ready to do a 1,800-mile round trip drive to get Kelly Girl a couch. So this is the highlight of my day right here before I do the drive.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. I had a good time with you on your podcast the other day, and I'm really excited to learn more about you. So what I would love to find out is, Tom, you've been in this industry for a very long time, like myself, but we both started. Somebody took us fishing when we were little. That's what did it. Can you kind of get into that for a little bit? So all our viewers, and then we'll touch on all the stuff you got going on. But first, how'd you get into fishing?
I was lucky enough to have a dad that found that was good quality time for me. I was probably a pretty rambunctious kid, but my dad took me fishing, and that was mostly for largemouth bass, bluegill. Started out with crickets and a bobber, and moved to lures eventually, and then I remember there was one trout trip that I went to a river called the Hiwassee River in Tennessee with him, and just used corn, and caught these fish. I didn't even know we had trout like that. It was beautiful. That one put that was a big time trip for me, because I always wanted to catch those later. And that's kind of eventually how I ended up, wanting to learn how to fly fish. It was just like one trip like that, where I was fishing with corn on the side of a trout river, turns into this, the beginning. It's the seed of a tree that grew in my life that eventually turns into fly fishing for trout. But my dad and I spent a lot of time together, fishing, and even today he's 80. He'll be 88 in March, and he still goes fishing occasionally. So we get out there every now and then.
Yeah, there's nothing more special than time on water with your dad. That is a pretty special time. How old do you think you were when you first went fishing with your dad?
Very young, 3 maybe.
Yeah, that's when my dad took me the first time when I was 3. Something about that, gang. So look at your children and think about that. You don't know what's going to happen, but you know what? If you don't take them fishing, then we know what's going to happen. They're not going to be into it. You got to start them out young, right, Tom?
That's right. I have 3 of my own children, and my oldest is 27, the middle is 25. Those are 2 boys, and then my daughter is 21. And we fished with all of them, all of their life, and they're all fishermen now. And that was also incredibly good time with the family, but also individually with each one of those kids on the boat or on the dock or on the bank or wherever we chose to fish. Both the boys decided to go to Montana State University in Bozeman, mostly because there was good trout fishing there, and they call it Trout U. It's been voted the #1 university to go to for trout fishing. You can also study there. I understand that they do classes, but you definitely get in a lot of fishing and some elk hunting and stuff like that. But the outdoors that any kid experiences, as long as it's done right. And I think that you wanted to talk about how I've seen it done right and how I've seen it done wrong, with different parents trying to push it on kids, or just having it be just part of their upbringing. But once it is, you develop a fishing partner for life, and then those kids, like my middle son, he just went after he graduated from Montana State. He immediately planned a trip to go to live in a van in New Zealand for 2 months and fish down there with his buddy. And so, I mean, it's a, like, if you can plant that seed, it grows and it turns into not only your fishing partner, but another person that is kind of a steward for the whole sport.
Well, we're going to go back to this for a minute, but New Zealand, that brown trout fishery there, that mesmerizes me every time I watch it. The brown trout average the length of your arm. That's an incredible. How did he do when he went there?
Well, he did great eventually, but it's a different fishing. It's different fishing than in Montana or in Tennessee or anywhere else. And I think that from what he told me, there are a lot fewer fish in those rivers. They're very big fish, but they're fewer. And if somebody fishes ahead of you, you don't see any fish. They if they see somebody, then I don't know where they go, under a rock or somewhere, but it makes it very, very difficult for somebody following up. So the trick, I think, there is to find places that haven't been fished. And in order to do that, as an angler that's not using a helicopter, or an angler that is just kind of living out of a van like that, a lot of miles on your feet, like, we're going to go to this river and we're going to walk 10, 12 miles up the river before we even start fishing, is what I haven't been yet. So I don't know. I mean, this is just secondhand coming from him, but eventually they figured it out and they started catching a lot of fish. But at first it was not easy. It was definitely not easy, but that's the kind of fishing that you're going for. Like, they didn't go down there because they thought it was going to be easy. They didn't think they were going to have 100 fish days. They knew that they were going to be stalking these fish and trying to catch these big fish, just like you're talking about. They're mesmerized by it, by the videos and the books and the magazines that we've all seen. And that's what they wanted. And if you're going to go down there and do it yourself, I would suggest either having a lot of money to where you can have guides that can show you how to do it, or, like my son, have a lot of time, because you can figure it out, but it's going to take some time. Just like if you went, to your area or to the Keys or whatever, you can figure it out, but it's going to take some time.
That's every time I talk to somebody who just got back from there, that's what they tell me. Those fish are very, very, very locked into any movement on the banks, and it's all stealthy fishing, a lot of on your hands and knees.
Yeah, they wear
sidearm cast.
I mean, they wear camo, like it's, and then a lot of times, like, the way that they're doing it down there is like a team kind of thing, where one person is up higher and they're spotting the fish, and the other person is like sneaking up on them. So you have a 2-man team, and that's the way you work with your fishing guide down there a lot. Is he's spotting for you, telling you where to go, and don't take another step, because you're right on the edge of spooking this fish. So now you need to cast that far, and at river level you can't see that fish, but from above a raised bank or up in a tree, you can actually see them. And so it's a team effort.
That's pretty much what I was told. And then if you make a bad cast, that's done. Now you're on your way again. You're walking another mile to get away from where you just messed the pool up.
Exactly right. That's so much different than like Montana fishing, where you could have, a bunch of people fishing in the same place. You could have drift boats running over these fish, and the fishing stays good. But there's a lot more fish in the river.
Yeah, it's a totally different fishery than anything we can imagine. But when you watch those videos, gang, if you've ever seen those brown trout in New Zealand, like I said, the small ones are the length of your arm. The big ones are the length of your leg. And the water is gin clean. It's like so clean. There's no, well, I made a mistake here, but I'm going to get them on the next. If you make a mistake, it's over.
Yeah.
It's over.
Then you pay for it by walking another couple of miles.
Right. And it sucks if you pull. One of my buddies said, if you drive for 2 hours to get to this new spot you're going to try, and you get there and there's a car already there.
Right.
You're like, dang.
Well, so happens when you pull up to a river, it looks like nobody's been there. And this happened to my son, I think, where you walk in there 5 or 6 miles and a helicopter lands in front of you. Like, oh, man, like, turn around and go back to the truck.
Right. You're done. You're done. Okay, so let's get back to where we first got started into fishing before kids and all that stuff. So you were 3, 4 years old, you got the bug, then you caught the trout on the corn. Now we're teenagers. When do you get the bug to start becoming a guide and taking people out and teaching
Well,
them how to fish?
I gotta say that when I got my driver's license, I kind of got away from fishing a little bit. Like, there were girls around, there were cars, you know. I mean, it's a little different than today, where the kids have so many different things, and some kids I know aren't even interested in getting their driver's license. When I got my driver's license, that was like freedom. And I got to say, I didn't fish as much then, but when I went to college, I went to the University of Alabama, and I don't know what happened there, but I got interested in fly fishing. And my dad was not a fly fisherman. No one around me was a fly fisherman. I had never really even held a fly rod, but for some reason, I read an article it wasn't even in a fly fishing magazine. It was more like a Field and Stream or an Outdoor Life or something. And I saw these pictures of people walking through the mountains and with a fly rod in their backpack. And I was like, man, that looks awesome. I want to do that. And so I asked my dad if I could get a fly rod, and I can remember exactly what he gave me. He gave me a 8.5-foot 6-weight Orvis 4-piece fly rod. And it was a Western series. I don't even know if they make that anymore, but it had a 25-year guarantee on it. And that's why he bought it for me, because he knew I was going to break it. And he bought that for me. And I went down to this pond in Tennessee first time, and somehow I had no idea what I was doing. Somehow I got the line out there with some kind of a frog fly on it, and I caught a 5-pound bass, which was one of the biggest bass I had ever caught in my entire life, fishing all different ways, and never really caught a really big one. And for whatever reason, I caught one that day, and boy, that did it. And then I was like, I don't know what this is. Maybe fly fishing is more effective, which I learned later that in some cases it is, and in a lot of cases it's not. But so I was kind of looking for something to do, and I saw this guy that I had known before, but he came back to school that year, that my first year there. He kind of showed up back at school, and he was different. His hair was longer. He was in great shape. He just looked different. His attitude was different. What'd you do this summer? He said, I worked in Yellowstone National Park. I was like, really? Where? I don't even know where that is, you know? And he's like, dude, it's the greatest place you've ever been in your life. And I was like, well, how do you do it? And he told me. He said, you just you apply for a job. And I did exactly what he said. I got a job at Lake Hotel, and that was the beginning of this whole new part of my life. As soon as I got off the airplane in Jackson, Wyoming, I looked around, I see the Tetons, I look around, like, man, this place is amazing. And went to Yellowstone National Park. I worked at Lake Hotel. Lake Hotel was a mile or so from the Yellowstone River. I could walk there. It stayed light until 10:30 at night. So I would do my job in the daytime, and then you could either hitchhike or somebody would give you a ride, or you could even walk to the river. And there was this world-class cutthroat trout fishing as soon as the season opened. And man, that was it. I saw that. I caught one fish where I was on a higher bank, like we were talking about in New Zealand, but I looked down and the water was so clear that it looked like this fish was floating in the air. I'll never forget it. And I was like, I couldn't even figure out what I was looking at. Coming from Tennessee, the water was murky. You never saw a fish before you caught it. And here's this fish. The water's so clear that it looks like it's floating in the air. And I somehow went down there. I was a terrible fly fisherman at the time, but I managed to catch that fish, and cutthroat trout aren't that smart, right? So I managed to catch that fish, and people have asked me before, like, when did you know, you wanted to be a professional fisherman or whatever? And it was at that moment right there. I was like, I don't know what this is exactly, and I don't know how I didn't even think you could make a living at it. I just knew this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And that has been kind of the way it's gone. Not exactly there, and not exactly for trout, and not all fly fishing, but that is how I've lived my life from that point forward to today, is that fishing has been the center of my life outside of family. you know, but it started right there. And you know, to your point, it started really when my dad took me and put a cricket on the hook at you know, when I was a real little kid. That's when it really started. But there was a second fire that was ignited when I went to Yellowstone National Park the following year. I thought I was going to go to Alaska, and my dad is a real smart guy, and he was like, "You're going to go to Alaska. You don't have a car. You don't know anybody up there." I heard that the fishing was great in Alaska, and I heard that anybody could get a job in a fish cannery in Alaska. I don't know. And my dad was like, that sounds like one of the worst ideas I've ever heard. So he just found this little ad in the back of some magazine. You know, like we used to look in the back of magazines and there'd be all these ads, right? And he just cut this little ad out, and in his signature way, he put it on a legal pad, yellow legal pad. He used to have these things all around. That's what he used for work. And he just pulled out of one of those pieces of paper. He scotch taped this ad to the center of this trifold, you know, legal pad, and put it in an envelope and said, would you rather do this instead of Alaska? And it was something for this, it was called Western Rivers Professional Guide School, hosted by a guy named Joe Bressler out of Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And it was the first year he had ever done the guide school. And it was the first school of its kind. And he just thought, you know, I don't have any guides to hire. What if I ran a school? Maybe I could get a couple of good guides in here. And that school, started this incredible thing in Jackson, Wyoming, and so many of the kids that went to that school ended up being professionals in fishing to today. And then also there was another little thing going on in Jackson Hole, and like so many people: Carter Andrews, Jeff Currier, myself, Matson Rod, Fletcher White, so many more. Pete Erickson went on to be on the world team for fly fishing. So many people. Lorianne Murphy. I'm forgetting more people than I could ever remember, but there was a core group of people in Jackson, Wyoming, that at that time that we were all getting started at the same time, and about 90% of those people continued on and made a profession out of fishing in one way or another. It was an incredible time, and I don't know. When you have some times like that and you're surrounded with people like that are all, you know, kind of like-minded, and everybody's trying to do something amazing, it really helps you to get a lot better, a lot faster than you would have otherwise.
That is so amazing. I never even thought about that. Opening up a school for guides.
Yeah.
That is just that guy was way ahead of his time, right?
Well, you know, the funny thing is he doesn't even have a high school education, but he was way ahead of his time, and he had the Orvis company behind him. They wanted to put a store in Jackson, Wyoming, and they wanted to make sure that they had plenty of guides there. And it was that was about 2 or 3 years, and lucky he did this, because that was about 2 or 3 years before the movie A River Runs Through It came out. And when that movie came out, we went from having 6 guides that would work about 2 or 3 days a week to having 25 guides that were working 7 days a week all summer long until the kids went back to school. It was an incredible time, because that time also was such a magical time, because that movie came out, but at the same time as that movie came out, fly fishing gear started getting so much better. The rods got better, the lines got better. There was Gore-Tex waders. There started to be more boat companies, drift boat companies. Before that first couple of years, I was fishing out of an 18-foot John boat, rowing it down the river backwards. And then, you know, a couple of years later, there are drift boat companies, and all this stuff just kind of happened at about the same time. And that happened to be when I was getting started. And it was an amazing time, because I wanted to fish year round. And I had this great clientele in the summertime, but I was going down to Key West. And it was an amazing thing. I would just all summer long, I would talk about what I do in the winter. And all those people I would fish with in the summer, they would come down and see me in the winter. And the same thing, if I had people in Key West, I would say, they were like, "What do you do all year?" And I'd say, "Well, in the summertime, I go back out to Jackson, Wyoming." They're like, "Oh, I'd love to go out there." So I would book people out there, and it just worked great, to build that clientele. And people will ask, including my sons, will ask, like, do you think you could do it again like you did right now? And I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know. That was such a magical time, and there were so many things happening in fishing, and specifically in fly fishing. There were so many innovations, and that movie was such a big deal, and so many people were going out west and discovering what it's like to have a vacation out west. And I don't know if I could do it again, or if anybody could do it again, because there was just this huge surge of people coming into fishing, and we happened to be there at that same time. It was an amazing time. So I don't know. There's a lot of timing that went into where my career started.
Yeah, that whole fly fishing thing with when a Brad Pitt and the river runs through, the whole thing was just magical. The movie was magical for any of us that are outdoorsmen. We could see the magic, and then it introduced people that would have never ever had a chance because it made it look so cool. It made you look cool, made you look outdoors, and then the whole hunt of the fish. They depicted it so perfect how it's. And Michael Folks and I talked about this in the history of sport fishing. For you and I and most of the people watching, it's all about the bite.
Mm-hmm.
That bite is so magical on a fly rod, gang. If you've never tried it, especially now, nymph fishing, different. But when you're dry fly fishing, gang, and that fly hits the water and you're ready and you're watching it and that fish comes up and slurps that thing, it's pretty.
There are things and I could name 6 or 8, and I'm sure that you could name 6 or 8 from your California, Cabo San Lucas fishing, that really, if you were to say, these are this is the ultimate in sport fishing, like a tarpon eating a mullet is the same kind of thing. I mean, I get the same, and that's where my fishing career has gone over, starting from fly fishing or from crickets to fly fishing to now all different types of fishing. But there's still things that I consider, like for tarpon fishing. Watching a tarpon eat a fly is amazing. Watching a tarpon eat a dry fly on a slick day, I mean, I'm talking like 120 pounder on fly, and you do that. We can throw out to these fish, and you can make this wake with this basically a deer hair fly, basically like a bass fly, but with the right hook on it. A big tarpon will come up and eat that out of nowhere. That's an incredible thing. I get just as excited to see one eat a mullet, right? I get just as excited to see a permit eat a crab, or a bonefish to tail up on a fly. And they're each one of these fish and each one of these species that we have, and I'm sure you would say the same thing about a rooster fish or something that I don't fish for very much. But there's like certain behaviors and certain times and certain things that they're doing are just like that's what does it for you, man. That's the ultimate, and each one of them has it seems like.
And it takes us right back to being a little kid. It takes us right, the whole thing, your body shake. It's just magical. Gang, we got to show you the new air coffin by Deckhand Sports, and we're going to get right back into talk. I want to go right back into talking about this. Check out this. This is the new air coffin by Deckhand Sports. Now, there's so many great products with Deckhand Sports. It's hard to keep track, but this is the new air coffin. It comes with the pump. It comes with the bag. And you pump this thing up. It takes no room. And then you throw it down on your boat underneath your center console where your seat is, underneath your bait tank. And now it's ready to go. It's ready to keep your fish fresh as you go. We're going to throw a couple of baits out here, catch a couple of fish. We'll throw them in the air coffin, show you what it looks like. You guys can go over to Deckhand Sports, see all the great products. We've been showing you the kill bag for the last year and a half. Now we're showing you the new, this is brand new, the air coffin. It's a spectacular product. Dave Farron and the guys at Deckhand Sports, this is what they do. They fish all the time. So they're constantly thinking of new and better ways to keep our fish fresh. That air coffin, most of us have an ice chest that we take with us, and it's so bulky and it's so big. This air coffin shrinks down, very small, easy to use. You got to check it out. Go to Deckhand Sports, gang. The QR code's up there on the screen. If you're listening to Tom and I while you're driving around in your car, when you get to wherever you're going, just go to deckhandsports.com, enter the code YSWG and the number 15. You're going to save 15% on any of the products you order there. But I would definitely suggest checking out that Deckhand Sports air coffin and all the other products. Gang, you see us carrying the lobsters off the boat on our live lobster trips. Everybody's got a Deckhand Sports backpack. The reason why we have those, they don't leak. They're guaranteed any of his products to not leak. And Dave stands behind his products. He's constantly on the show, helping all of our members out. Don't think for 1 second he won't help you out. Even if you're in Florida with Tom, Deckhand Sports will be there for you. All right,
man. I like how you pump it up.
Yeah.
I mean, there's other ones where you know, they're just bags. And they won't stand up. They're just, that one looks good.
Oh, look at it, just comes down like you're carrying a purse for your wife. And then you open it up and you just blow it up and you got yourself a nice chest. But it's called the Deckhand Sports Air Coffin, gang. Don't hesitate on this one, gang. You want to check it out. You want to save the 15% on it. And then Tom and I were talking before we went live on the show. Dave Farron's definitely going to get your number when we're done with the show so you guys can talk.
Cool.
Because I think this will work good for you guys. All of his products, I think it would be really good for everybody in Florida. So, Tom, you were talking about tarpon. Now, that's a bucket list fish for me. I've got to fish for him a couple times, leave ICAST, go down and go fish. And also I lived in Fort Lauderdale for 5 months while we were building the 80-foot Viking. And I didn't understand what you guys were all saying. I jumped 5 tonight. I jumped 6. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Jump. Gang, it's the most amazing thing you've ever seen. When you, and I'm a fisherman, but I don't know anything about a tarpon. The minute they feel that steel, the thing starts jumping like, you know, we catch Dorado out here on the West Coast and down here in Cabo, and they jump, but not like a tarpon. The moment they touch that hook, they leap. And me being the first time I ever done it, and you're going to tell me all about this, but I froze. My jaw was, and the guide was like, hit me in the shoulder. He goes, Dave, that was yours. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but the jump was just epic. And then I started to comprehend what you mean by I jumped 5, I jumped 10. I'm like, okay, talk about that for a little bit, and then we'll get into what you're doing today. But talk about this tarpon thing, because it's got me mesmerized.
Well, the tarpon is an incredible fish. They call it the Silver King for a reason. It is definitely one of the world's greatest game fish. What makes it one of the world's greatest game fish, in my opinion, is its availability to a lot of people. You know, it's available up and down the East Coast. It's available certainly in the Keys, Mexico, all over the place. But then it eats a lot of different things. It'll eat a dead bait. It'll eat a crab on the surface. It'll eat a shrimp. It'll eat a fly. It'll eat a lure. It'll eat. You can catch them offshore, inshore. You can catch them in a lot of different ways. So it's available to a lot of people, and then they eat a lot of different things that makes it available to a lot of different tackle. Then they're migratory. So a lot of times they're not around all the time, which increases the kind of allure, right? Like a certain time of the year, like maybe in some years it's January, some years it's February. It seems to be getting a little bit earlier every year, but it used to be April, May, and June. That used to be what you would count on. And then now it's kind of like February, March, April, May. They migrate like a bird. So they're going to come through the Florida Keys, come through South Florida, and then they'll be like through northern Florida at a different time. But they are migrating through. The numbers increase from just a few around the docks to they're everywhere. And they're a spooky fish, or they can be a spooky fish, but they can also be kind of they can eat. If you get them in the right situations, they can eat giant lures. But then you can get in another situation to where you literally throw a 2-inch fly at them, and it's like they're terrified of it. And so it's a fish that it's not consistent. It's not consistent at all. Like sometimes you can catch them on a 10-inch swim bait, and it can crash right in front of them and they eat it, or they'll eat a 12-inch mullet. But then other times they're only looking for these tiny little shrimp or these pololo worms. And so in a lot of ways they're kind of like a trout, like match the hatch, or you gotta give them what they want at the time that they want it. You can fish with other things and it'll be very unproductive. When they also have a mouth structure that makes it difficult to hook them. They don't have any teeth necessarily, but their mouth is very, very rough all the way around the edges, and up inside their mouth is very, very rough. But their mouth is like, there are very few places where you can get a hook in there. Now, as the hooks have gotten better over time, chemically sharpened, narrow, smaller wire, all of that has improved the hookup ratio to landing of a tarpon. But back when I first started, we were sharpening all of our hooks, and there were different ways that you would do this. Some people believed in this short, stubby ones, and other people believed in like making the hook like a hypodermic needle, like a long, skinny thing. But then I felt like that kind of rolled. So, you had to come up with your own way of sharpening these hooks, and then which hooks worked the best, because some hooks you could get the hook in there, but then they would bend out. Today we have so much, the hooks have come so far that's gotten a lot better. But a lot of times, you're using a bait where like a mullet, you're having to use a hook that's pretty large so that you can actually get some kind of bite on that hook, right? The bait is actually impeding the hook gap, right? So that's one of the things that makes it to where you don't land as many as you hook. In addition to that, they wear through the leader. So you could jump fish like that, like what you're talking about. Is a lot of people will come back and they'll give their tally of what they did today by, well, I jumped 3. Okay, that's kind of success as a tarpon fisherman, unfortunately. But sometimes it's the way you want, because if they're biting really good, you don't want, I mean, like you were talking about, like the best part about the whole thing is the bite, watching that fish eat and then having them on for 3 or 4 jumps. A lot of times that's enough. If you want to, I mean, this is a 120-pound fish and you've got a pretty light rod. A lot of times, you don't want to be hooked to that fish for an hour or 20 minutes. You should never fight one that long anyway. When you know kind of what you're doing, you can understand how to fight these fish to where you can whip one of those really big fish pretty fast, but still it's pretty taxing on the angler. So, I mean, even a great angler, to land 5 or 6 big tarpon in a day, that you're going to be pretty tired. And some people aren't even capable of doing it. So, if you hook a fish and you get a few jumps out of them, and maybe snap a couple of pictures while they're jumping and they get off, it's probably better for the fish. It's probably better for you. You can keep on fishing. But they can be very difficult to catch. They can be very, very, they can just refuse to bite. And it can be maddening, because you can see a school of 100 fish coming at you in gin clear water, 4 feet of water, 100 fish in either a line or a meatball, or coming down the ocean at you, and you can cast at them and cast at them and cast at them and cast at them. And some days they're just not eating. And so some days people will go out there and they're like, we got 100 shots. We can get a single one to bite. That's kind of how it's been lately. But sometimes you hook a couple and you jump them. Sometimes you throw to one fish and you hook it just right and you land it. Like, I don't know. It's like a funny fish like that, but it is responsible for ruining many people's marriages, ruining people's lives, ruining people altogether, because once they try it one time, they have to do it forever. There's a great book. I had this guy on my podcast. His name's Monty Burke, and he wrote a book about tarpon fishing. And what was that book called? What was his book called? Monty Burke? No, it was, I can't remember. Monty Burke. I think it was something about tarpon. But anyway, he tells all these stories about how tarpon have, it's called Lords of the Fly, and is a great book. And he would be a great person on your podcast too. That one right there, that's it. Fantastic book, and he's got a lot of stories. But tarpon fishing, tarpon have a big and wide reputation, but they're only one of 60 fish that we fish for in the Florida Keys regularly. 60 different species, and there's offshore guys, and there are plenty of people that fish in the Florida Keys all the time, never go tarpon fishing. And then there's other people, and that's all they want to do. But people are equally as into tarpon as they are sailfish or swordfish. Like, we got a crazy group of daytime sword fishermen. That's all they want to do is go out and drop for the swords. But I mean, that's what's incredible about the Florida Keys, is that there's just so many different species and so many different ways to fish for almost all of them, that we are lucky enough to be able to fish pretty much every day of the year, and there's always something happening, if whether it's inshore or offshore.
No, Florida is like Disneyland for outdoorsmen, a fisherman like myself. I got that taste of it when I was living there, building that boat in Lauderdale, and something that I didn't know, and you guys kind of kept it a secret. Maybe it's not a secret, but for some reason I didn't know about the peacock bass fishery. My goodness. Well,
that hasn't always been there, right? Like, when I was growing up, I mean, that's an introduced species, and so
congratulations for introducing it, because that was magic.
Well, that's something that I don't do that much, but I have had a bunch of those people that are fanatical about catching those peacock bass in the canals all around South Florida, and not just canals, but in the lakes and rivers and all kinds of places they're in right now. And there's some really big ones, and some people will go on these big trips to the jungle fishing and try to catch peacock bass, but you could go right next to the Miami airport and catch them, and catch some really good ones.
Well, that's what we were fishing. Is it Biscayne Bay or Biscayne in Miami?
Yep.
That's where we were fishing tarpon in the morning at gray light, and there were 150 pounders everywhere. It was the most insane thing I'd ever seen. And like I said, I jumped 3 and I was just blown away. But gosh, I was just mesmerized by the whole thing. And that's when I believed in the guide, because we're in the middle of Miami. Yes. In the middle of the bay. It's the most, and I was in my brain, I'm thinking, this guy is just taking my money. Yeah. And then he goes, just wait a minute, Dave. It's time of day. Watch. He goes, about 6:45, we're going to start seeing them. I'm like, all right. About 6:45, they're everywhere. Like Tom said, they're everywhere. And so we had that phenomenal thing. And then he was like, Dave, what else do you want to catch? Because you're here. And what else do you want to catch? And I was like, shoot, I don't know. And he said, you ever thought of catching a peacock bass? And I said, yeah, I don't want to go to the Amazon, though. I hate bugs. There's already enough bugs in Florida. Don't get me wrong. You guys have plenty of bugs. But he goes, do you want to catch a peacock? And I was like, okay, yeah, I would love to catch a peacock. That would be like right there with tarpon. And he goes, okay, well, let's go have lunch, and then we'll go finish the afternoon catching some peacocks. And I was like, okay, because he had me. Yeah. And then he goes, this was 4 years ago, so I was 59. He goes, are you okay with jumping fences? And I was like, is there fish on the other side? He goes, yeah, there's fish on the other. I said, I'll be over it before you. And he was like 30. And we got there, and he's trying to put the stuff together in the back of his truck. And I'm like over the fence, and he goes, stop, don't go right up to the edge. They're everywhere. And I'll be go to heck, my first cast, boom, I got my peacock. And then I don't know, we caught as many as we wanted that day. It was pretty magical. That's a pretty cool fishery, Tom. And you don't have to go out on the boat. You don't have to hunt. They're everywhere, gang. If you guys, anybody wants to catch a peacock bass, Fort Lauderdale South, any pond, it's pretty amazing. It's a pretty cool fishery. There I am, jumping the fence, climbing through the guy's backyard.
Yeah, as long as you're not, trespassing. But I think a lot of that is open for fishing, you know.
Oh yeah, the guy told me he's not going to take you anywhere. This is what he does for a living. He's got a guide license. We're not going illegal fishing. You got to jump over the fence. There's a fence because there's that electrical thing right there. And right there is so many of them right there. I was just,
Who is that? That David Cohen?
Yep.
Oh,
Me and
man.
Dave.
Yeah,
No
man.
way. No way.
The podcast. Yeah, I love David Cohen, man. He's got a great story. He also catches tons of tarpon, man.
That's who I went with.
That's a good dude.
He's a great guy. It was so cool because it was an accidental meet. One of the guys when we were building the boat was like, you need to go fish with my buddy Dave. And he goes, if you want to catch a tarpon, this is the guy to go with. And he's an animal like you and me. He's in it. He's in it 100%. He's in it.
He's in. He's been able to do great. I had him on the podcast. He was one of the early guests on the podcast, and we stayed in touch ever since. Yeah, he's a great guy.
How crazy is that?
That's what fishing is, you know. I mean, the fishing world, you know, is a very small place. It seems like it's not, but you know, if you get some people that have been fishing for a little while, you're going to know some of the same people. You're going to have fished with some of the same people. You're going to have been to some of the same places, and you know, it's kind of cool. I'm sure you have this experience too. Like if you go someplace like Costa Rica or I've been to Christmas Island a couple of times, and like you start to talk to the fishing guides there, and usually there's some sort of a language barrier, but kind of like, you know, I'm a guide. I do what you do. And they're like, what? Really? Where? It's like in the Florida Keys. And they're like, Florida. Yeah, no, Florida. And then you're kind of speaking kind of broken English, you know, sometimes it's Spanish kind of, and you're kind of communicating, but there's this brotherhood of like, I know what you do and you know what I do, and we're out here for the same reason. And they can kind of, you know, it's just some of the coolest things, some of the coolest experiences I've had are when you're not really speaking the same language, but you know, like this guy does exactly what I do and I do what he does, and we're immediately friends, even though we're not even speaking the same language. We're doing the same thing, and he shows something, and you show him a knot, and he's like, yeah, I've never seen it like that. And then he shows you a knot, and you're like, oh wow, that's so cool how you're rigging this thing. I love that. That's one of my favorite things about fishing and traveling is meeting the other guides that, you know, are doing the same kind of thing. And everybody has a little trick. Everybody has one little trick that they're doing that's better than what you do for that particular thing, right? And we can all share knowledge and learn from one another. That's one of my favorite things.
Well, my thing is wherever I go, when I've never been there before, and I talk about it on my podcast, I hire a guy. I don't care what I do. I've never been to your water. I don't know. So my ego goes in my pocket. I keep my mouth shut. I never want to tell anybody what I know because I don't know anything. I've never been to your water before. Like Dave, I jumped in like a tourist. I was just a guy going fishing, met him at the McDonald's parking lot, jumped in his truck, didn't want to pretend like I knew anything because I didn't know anything. So there wasn't, hey, I do this, I do that. And I had that little bass reel. And I went to Big Five not Big Five, Bass Pro Shop right there in, where's that? Right next to the IGFA Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
And I got that bass set up. Okay. And we're driving in Dave's truck and he's going, hey, I would rather if you just use this spinning rod and reel. And I was like, yeah, I don't even know how to hold it. Maybe you could show, because I don't use spinning reels. I don't know how to hold it. And I'm like, yeah, okay, no problem. When we get there, you can show me how to do it and everything. And then we went and threw the net, caught a bunch of tilapia for bait. And then we pulled up there and he's all, hold on, just wait a second. Let me tie the hook on for you. Let me get you all rigged up. Let me just try it my way real quick and see if it works. And I didn't pretend like I knew anything. I just tied on a number 4 hook and I jumped that fence and I grabbed that tilapia out of the bucket and I flipped it out there underhand. And he was like, and I had that peacock bass. And then we got to talk because I want to go where you guys go. And I don't want to hold back nothing. I want you to treat me like everybody else that you treat. The guys that fish with me that come on the boat and start telling me all the things they know, that, you know, big turnoff right there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I want to suck up your knowledge, Tom. I want to know what you know about that tarpon. I want to know what you know about the Keys. I've never been there before. I don't want to go in there, swinging my wiener around, pretending like I know what I'm talking about. So, gang, if any of you are listening,
different way of doing it though, of like letting them know that you are a guide and doing it in a different way, and that you're there to learn. And man, when it's like having somebody on the podcast, they start pouring out the information. Like, you know, when they understand, like, this isn't like an ego trip that you're doing. You're here to learn. And then it's like everything. I'll show you everything.
Yeah, well, we got into talking about rooster fish because that's a fish most of the guys in Florida haven't got to do yet. And everybody wants to do the rooster fish. And that's kind of what I do here. I'm not really much. I'll take you marlin fishing and you'll catch more marlin you ever caught before in your life. But can we get into the beach and go fish mullet on the beach for these roosters? That's nice. What we're doing. We're slow trolling up and down the beach until we locate the school.
Are you doing it with a kite, or with, how are you slow trolling up and down? Or in a boat?
Yeah, in a ponga.
Oh, you're in a boat. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
A lot of my guys, you know, do the rooster fishing from the beach. One of my friends did an awesome movie. I think it was called Running Down the Man. Did you ever see that movie? And they like this guy's name is Frank Smethurst, and he was one of the fly fishing guys I used to hang out with in the Rocky Mountains. And it was one of the early fly fishing movies, like back probably like 2008. I mean, like, YouTube was barely a thing. And they got in these dune buggies that they rented, I guess, that you can take on the beach down there. I guess that's the thing. And they were driving down, and they would try to see the roosters and jump out of there and run down there and fly cast to them. And you know, great movie. It was incredible. Like, it was a movie that stirred something in you. You're like, I don't know what that is, but I want to do it.
Oh, it's pretty magic, this rooster thing, because when you find the school, those things are all back there behind the boat, and that fin's up in the air, and they're chasing those baits. And then you take the boat out of gear, and everybody casts out a live mullet, and they're all fighting. The mullet or the roosters are all fighting for your bait. It's pretty magical.
Fish. It looks like it has the same body structure as a lot of different jacks.
That's all it is.
It's a jack.
It's a jack with
the comb.
And it's a jack with a mohawk.
Yeah. I mean, they act, and some of the stuff I've seen, I've never fished for them. I've never even seen one in person, but some of the stuff that I've seen, they have a lot of the same kind of behavior as a lot of the jacks that we have. But a lot of the jacks that we have, you know, can also be super shy. Like a permit is a jack, and a permit can be the hardest fish that we have to catch. And they are totally a jack, and they're not that different in body structure. In a lot of people might not even be able to tell the difference between a permit and a Jack Crevalle, but a Jack Crevalle is super aggressive and a permit's very, very shy. So the Jack family is one of my favorite families in the ocean, because it has, you know, they're all kind of similar, but then they're very, very different in what they eat and how they eat, and which ones are shy and which ones are really spooky. Then you throw in the trevally, like, that's another fish that, you know, can be super aggressive, or also like very, you know, shy in certain situations.
Yeah, that rooster right there, that guy's Jason Grayshock. They own Fishing Boats Unlimited in Newport, and he's fished all over the place. And that was his first rooster ever, and that's a whopper. He's a big boy, and that's a big rooster. But
beautiful fish.
It's a pretty spectacular. Day after Christmas down here, me and a couple of my buddies went out on his Hatteras, and we found the giant trevallies, Jack Crevalle trevallies, and they were biting the surface iron about as good as they could. I got 5, and I couldn't even pick up my arms anymore.
What size are those? Where you're catching them?
35, 40 pounders.
Okay.
And they were all on the surface chasing mackerel, and there was zillions of them, and there was no boats, just us. And there was me and his 2 sons on the bow fishing the surface iron. There it is. There's a nice one right there. And we're fishing the surface iron. And jacks fight like, gang, if you guys haven't caught, it's a yellowtail. It's just a yellowtail on steroids. It's all right. Those of you watching in New Zealand or Australia, it's a kingfish on steroids. These things are mean and nasty and big, wide tail, big motor, and they pull really hard. That head, that thump that you get, every jack does it when they get their head down and they're doing that thump. Oh, it's so hard on your back, gang. That's the hardest thing on your back. But so Tom, you took this whole thing to a whole different level. TV show, podcast, all the. Can we talk about that for a few minutes?
Sure. Yeah.
So how did you get into the TV production part of this fishing
Well, the TV production happened kind of accidentally, honestly. I was a fishing guide, fishing 300 days a year in Key West. And I also had two small kids. They're my two oldest kids, the ones I told you are 27 and 25. So when they were really young, that was when I was fishing 300 days a year and also looking for other opportunities. There were some opportunities to fish in tournaments. In the Florida Keys, we had something called the Red Bone Series, which was a series of charity tournaments that were for cystic fibrosis. They raised money for cystic fibrosis, and you didn't win any money if you were in one of these things, and the guides didn't even get to fish. You would have an angler, and then you would be a 2-man team or 3-man team in some of these tournaments, and you would try to win these tournaments. And basically, the only thing that anyone won was this art. Like, you can see this stuff that's behind me, like these kind of things. A lot of that stuff was won in those kind of tournaments, right? So it's really, you're not winning any cash, but it was the highest profile thing you could do. If you won that as a guide, this is before the internet, it's before lots of other means of advertising. This was absolutely the best way to develop your reputation and get a lot of business. So if you could win some of these tournaments with your angler and you would win it as the guide, you couldn't even touch the fishing rod. You would win it as the guide, and you would develop your clientele. So I was able to do some of that. I was able to do well in a lot of these tournaments. And then I started looking at other tournaments. Well, if those have been as good for my career as they have been, are there other situations out there, other tournaments that I might be able to fish in? And honestly, I was a high school wrestler, and I liked competition, and I had been away from athletics for a while. And the first fishing tournament that I got into, I was like, this is what I was missing. I've missed this whole competitive feeling. I didn't even know that I missed it until I got back into it. And when you get into one of these tournaments, it starts out with a boat race, and then it's a physical event because I'm poling the boat all day long. There's a lot of adrenaline. There's a lot of excitement. And I had the same kind of feeling that I did when I was a wrestler. And I was like, man, I've got to have more of this. And so I liked the tournaments. And at the same kind of time frame, there were these other tournaments that were professional redfish tournaments, and it was a 2-man team. And we would they were on ESPN, and then there was another one called the IFA Professional Redfish Tournament. And again, they were sports in their infancy, and so they would hold these tournaments, but there was very little cash to win, even though they're professional tournaments. It would cost several $1,000s to get into, and if you won, maybe the team would win a boat that was worth $50,000, but it was a boat that was supposedly worth $50,000. You probably sold it for 30 if you won, and then you're splitting that between two people. You've taken 2 weeks off to go up there and fish for this thing. So there wasn't any money in it, right? We could have made the 15,000 back home. And so we started, me and I got a partner, Rich Tudor, who was one of my main competitors in these charity tournaments. And we started traveling around, and we were doing pretty well in these redfish tournaments. We would do really well in some of them and really badly in others, which was also very similar to wrestling and very similar to high school athletics, where, you could see how you need to get better, and we got to work on these things. And it was this big learning curve. We were doing pretty well in the Florida Keys or any place that was similar to that, where it's sight casting, shallow water. But if we would go to a different type of fishery, we would do terrible. We didn't know how to fish there. And we would, if there'd be 65 boats in there, I remember one time we came in 65th place. The week before we had come in second place. And so it was just all about styles, and it was about learning how to do these different types of fishing and learning where to fish and how to fish. And some of these guys, you're going into people's backyard that are professional guides, and you're expected to be able to compete with them. So, I mean, man, it got competitive because nobody wants an outsider to come into their backyard and win the tournament. So everybody's trying to win these things, and it became a real high profile type deal, even though there were very little money in it. Well, I had these two boys at home, and a hurricane came through Key West while I was in Louisiana, and I couldn't get home. My wife couldn't get out, and she had to take shelter in my friend's fish house that was basically a concrete block building with no windows in it. She was fine, but I just decided at that point, I'll never do this again. I will never be gone like this again. I'm not doing any more of these tournaments, and I'm done. And so I told my partner that, and we had a very quiet ride back from Venice, Louisiana, all the way to about Orlando, Florida. And he said, well, if we're not going to do the tournaments, then what could we do? And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to be in my house, in my bed every night with my family. And that's all I'm doing. And so another 100 miles went by, and he's like, well, maybe we could do something in the Keys. I was like, I don't know. I guess we could do a TV show. And he's like, what do you know about doing a TV show? And I said, well, I don't know. I don't really know anything about doing a TV show, but I've been on about 30 of them as a guest. And I had been, because this thing right behind me here was the Great Outdoor Games. And I was I had an opportunity to go and compete in this tournament. It was a fly fishing tournament for trout. It was the ESPN Great Outdoor Games. It was held in New York on the Ausable River, and it was a casting competition. And then based upon the casting competition, your place in there, then that was how you picked the stretch of river. And so I went up there to this thing, and it was a really big deal, I guess, looking back on it, because it was on ESPN, it was on ABC Sports, and it was supposed to be the next big thing. They were kind of calling it the Outdoor Olympics, and I won the first one ever. And probably I would say that the first one ever had the best ratings of any of them that they ever had. I think it kind of went down from the first year. The ratings just kind of declined until they just stopped doing it. But it went on for 5 or 6, 7 years. But I won the first one, and it was a great hook to call any of these television shows and say, hey, I've got a story for you. I just won this tournament. It's a trout fishing tournament, but I'm a guide in Key West. Would you want to come down here and fish with me in Key West? And they were everybody I proposed that to was like, sure, that sounds awesome. And I did it for free. I just said, just come on down. And it was great for my charter business. I got lots of business out of it. And I just kept doing these things as kind of a way to improve my business. And I did about 30 of them before we ever did ours. And I watched how everybody did it. And I never thought that it was something that I was going to do. But when I got to the point to where I never wanted to do another tournament again, we thought, okay, well, we have a few sponsors. We could go to these sponsors and ask them if they would prefer us to do a television show and just take the money that they were paying us for these tournaments and just put it towards a television show. And we got on an airplane and we went around to the 3 or 4 different sponsors that we had, and every single one of them said, yes, that would be way better than the tournaments. And that's how Saltwater Experience started. In the first year, it wasn't very good. And in fact, it was so bad that we went to the Outdoor Channel and they said, yeah, we can't put this on the air. It's terrible. And we said, well, what do we need to do to make it better? And they said, well, you got to go back to the drawing board. You got to start over. And so we did that. But along the way, we had a few of these sponsors that believed in us. And they said, well, you don't have to be on the Outdoor Channel. But we did get it on the Outdoor Channel that first year. But we were disappointed because, I'm fishing 300 days a year, and people come, I meet them at the dock, and I'm saying, hey, did you see the fishing show? Did you see the TV show? They say, no, I don't know anything about a TV show. I'm like, you didn't see it? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, do you get the Outdoor Channel? They say, yeah, I get the Outdoor Channel. I'm like, well, the Outdoor Channel had a logo, and it had a moose, but there was another channel called Outdoor Life Network, which was widely distributed, much more widely distributed than the Outdoor Channel. And they go, no, I don't get the one with a moose. I get the other one. And so we were like, okay, well, we just put all this work and effort and time into this one, but nobody's seeing it. So the next year, we were on OLN, which was the Outdoor Life Network, and ESPN2 at the same time. And everybody saw that.
Oh, that, yeah.
That was a way different deal. Now I met people at the dock and they were like, yeah, we saw the show. Now we saw the show. We saw it. And so we did that for a couple of years, and it was good because it was a challenge, because at that time, all the fishing shows that were on television were single host format. You had Jose Wahebe was basically the only saltwater guide. Mark Sosin, I guess, was a saltwater guy. And Flip Pallet. But those shows were like really central, one host centric. They were telling a story. You had Bill Dance, Roland Martin, all of those legendary television hosts, all single host format, talking directly to the camera. And we had two of us. And so we tried to do a format like them. And that's why our show was so bad the first year, because we were trying to do what was the way you're supposed to do a show, talk directly to the camera, but there were two of us. It wasn't working. It wasn't working at all. So with the help of the producer that we had, Hop Litzwater, he kind of came up with this idea that we would sit at this table and it would be kind of like Dateline, like where the interviewer is talking to the person that they're interviewing, but you just kind of catch a little bit of their shoulder and you can see the other person's face, and then there's another camera coming this way. And he's like, that seems kind of cool. It's like documentary style and you can do it. Well, we were like, I don't know, it's got to be better than what we were doing. So we tried that, and people really liked it. I mean, it was really good, and it was very unique for the fishing world. Nobody had seen anything like that. And this guy was not really coming from a fishing world. He was coming from a documentary world and a big time television show world. And he did this format, and it worked, and it worked great, and people loved it. So a few years later, we started an offshore show, same kind of format, same interview style, two host format. Then we repeated it again with a bass show. We started to be able to just repeat these things. And along the way, we started to realize, we like television. And maybe, it started out where I was fishing 300 days a year. So that's basically every single day. And Rich was doing the same thing, but we couldn't get anything done as far as sponsorship or phone calls or anything. So we decided one time, one of us would take Tuesday off, and then the other one would take Wednesday off. So we'd have 2 days in the office, and then we'd fish every other day. And then, over the years, one of us would take Monday and Tuesday off, and the other one would take Wednesday and Thursday off. And so eventually we covered a whole week, and we just started fishing a little bit less and producing television shows a little bit more. And, I don't know. That's how it went. But there's been a lot of other changes too, and all of these changes have happened because of what goes on in the industry. So as television ratings started to decline on conventional television, we started to look for a solution. Like if people are not watching conventional television like they once were, where are they going? So we thought, well, it's an app. And so we created an app, and that's Waypoint. And then even since then, Waypoint has changed so much with the fast space and the podcast world. And it's just been these series. There's never been like this one big jump. It's just been these series of little adjustments all along of okay, the world's changing, and we need to be over there, and we need to be over there, and we need to be over there. And also kind of, being either naive or dumb or super optimistic to think that, what do we know about building an app or running a television network? Absolutely nothing. Well, why does that mean we can't do it? We absolutely can, and I don't know. I mean, in some ways it's been a miracle that some of this stuff has happened and worked. And in other ways we've lost, a lot of sleep, and we have made some mistakes, and certainly haven't done things the way we would if we could rewind the clock and go back. But like, it's been this small series of, and the podcast is the same kind of thing. I like podcasts. I like to listen to podcasts. I thought, well, people might like to listen to a fishing podcast. I have a lot of knowledge. I have a lot of people I'd like to talk to. Why don't I just push record and see what happens? And now I'm 1,000 episodes in, and it's just like you, man. Like you're doing a great thing, man. You are sharing your knowledge with all of these people, and you're doing it in a way that is interesting and unique, and you're being very, very generous with your knowledge, and you're getting other people on that are generous with their knowledge. And that's an amazing thing for the fishing industry. It's an amazing thing for any industry. And I'm sure that you look back on it and go, man, I should have started this 5 years earlier, right? Like where would you be now if you started 5 years earlier? But at least you got started. And so many people are sitting there thinking, I should start this YouTube channel, or I should start my podcast, or start, man. Just get it started. And if you can do that, no idea where it could take you. And maybe it doesn't go anywhere, but maybe it's just that creative outlet that you need to get through COVID, or to get through this period of your life where you really need some sort of an outlet to do things. And in other ways, I've seen it take off for people, and they build this whole business like what you're doing, man. Like, this is amazing what you've got going on. It's fantastic.
Thank you so much for that, Tom. So you started Waypoint?
Yeah.
Did you really?
Yeah.
So I've been giving you my money for a long time.
Well, yeah. Well,
That's awesome.
I hadn't made any yet, so
keep giving it. Okay.
Yeah, giving it.
That's okay. That's amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And when you reached out to me to be on your podcast, I'll tell you what, my producer and I, Elliot, we've thought, okay, now this is what all those seeds we planted and all this water we've been pouring on here in these 6 days a week doing the podcast, and just waiting and hoping and just bringing in the best people we can bring in and listening. And then Tom reached out to me, and I'll tell you, Tom, it was a very good feeling. I've been riding this high since you and I talked for 5 days now. That's and awesome. It's a big, big high. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of that, this Instagram just took off with that video of mine. I can't even.
Yeah. Well, I think we're just getting started, man. I love what you're doing. I love it. I think that, I love to see somebody who has earned a tremendous amount of information. And I say earned information because it's a series of hard lessons, man, to get to where you are and to do what you have done, and to come from a family that like when you told your story of your family and your dad and him starting out, carting fish with a bicycle, and then owning the whole deal later. I mean, that's an amazing story in itself. And then you go, so there's so much information there, and your willingness to share it, and the way that you're sharing it, and the willingness and the goal to get more kids into the sport is fantastic. And I'd love to support it in any way that we can. And like, the Instagram is super easy. We can start to collaborate there, but I think we could also come up with some sort of little series where there's some sort of like the Florida people don't know much about California fishing. They don't know much about West Coast fishing. And I think that like one of the things that I'm into is like anglers unite. Like we need to be, we need to stop infighting between little groups of fishermen, because there's other groups out there. And as you've talked about on my podcast, you've experienced it way more in California than anybody else has on the East Coast, of closures and all kinds of other things. And really the best way to protect your fishing rights is to just understand what everybody's doing, and understand what it is that you like to do, and what the Florida people like to do. And Florida people can support, the resistance to closures in California, and California people can have an impact on what goes on in Florida and the water quality and all kinds of different things by writing congressmen and letting our voices be heard as a group of anglers, right? Recreational or commercial. Like, even that little infighting is like ridiculous in my mind. But I think that it would be cool to work together and bring the California and the Florida thing together in some way, to where at least there's more familiarity, to where it's not like California's Mars and Florida is Venus. Like, like for
We're all the United
more,
States.
yeah, but for Florida people to know more about what goes on over there and what you guys fish for over there, and for you guys to know that, what goes on in Florida, because there's tons of people that fish California. They're never going to go to Florida. Tons of Florida guys are never going to go to California. But if we know, like, maybe we could get more crossover.
I think we could. I think you and we got a big enough voice. I think I like your idea. I would love to work more with you. I think that would be spectacular for both of us, to turn everybody on to what we both got going on, because the West Coast needs to know what's going on out there, and the East Coast needs to know what's going on out here, like we talked about when I was on there, because we're under, I don't want to say attack, but we're under a phenomenal amount of pressure out here on the West Coast. They do not like us fishing on the West Coast. So we need you and me to get together and help this out here on the West Coast. And I think if more people in Florida understood what Ron DeSantis did yesterday for you guys to help, because I had Jimmy on my podcast, and from the Everglades Fish Company.
Okay.
And
yeah.
Him and I talked deep about the Everglades and how it's not supposed to be all those mangroves, and how that water quality has brought those mangroves there, and how it's supposed to be that grass instead of the mangroves. Mm-hmm. What Ron did yesterday was pretty amazing. That water, the clean up that water there, and to clean up the Everglades and all that stuff it all affects the Keys tremendously, because that's where the filter is.
Yeah. Well, that whole deal has been kind of spearheaded by a lot of different groups, but the one that I have been the most familiar with their work is Captains for Clean Water, and Captains for Clean Water is a group that I like, because those guys they're just like me. They were fishing guides, and something happened in their water and they couldn't fish anymore, and they decided that they were going to do something about it, and they have basically dedicated their life to protecting water quality, right? Like they're not trying to make some kind of crazy political thing. They just want clean water, right? And if we have clean water, we got fish. Like that's it. But that's a good group. There's a lot of good groups out there, a lot of good groups, and if you can give any support to any of them, that'd be fantastic. But if you just are looking for a group to support and you don't know much about this issue, you can, or if you're looking for a way to learn about this, on that website that you're showing right now, there's a lot of information there. And it's a weird problem, because the way that a lot of people get very, very confused about the water quality issues in the Everglades, because in some places, like in the Florida Keys, there's no fresh water flow, right? So it used to flow down across this river of grass, which is the Everglades, and it would percolate through like you're making coffee, right? Like it percolates through, and it's cleaning all this water, and it's nourishing all this through this river of grass. And over years, that's been a series of dikes and roads and dams and all kinds of things that block that flow, right? Well, at the same time, none of that fresh water is really getting to the Florida Keys. So there's areas where it gets super high salinity. But then people hear, oh, we have too much fresh water in Florida. Like it's a freshwater problem. So how can you have too much salinity and too much fresh water? Well, it's because they have to route all this water that used to flow down. They have to route it out these two rivers that go out both sides of the Florida the state of Florida, outside of Lake Okeechobee. And when that water it's an unnatural amount of fresh water that also contains a lot of fertilizer and other things, where it gets pushed out the side of Florida. Then it hits this nice warm salt water, and we get these crazy algae blooms. And meanwhile, too much fresh water up here, not enough fresh water down here, which makes it a very confusing issue for somebody that has only been to Florida 2 or 3 times in their life to understand. Like I don't understand how it could be like that, and it sounds like it's just too big of a problem to fix, but it's not. And these guys have answers, and that's what I liked about that group right away, is that it wasn't just a bunch of finger pointing saying that you've ruined the state of Florida or you've messed it all up. It was, hey, wait a minute, there are solutions that have already been proposed. In fact, there's money set aside for these solutions. We just need to enact what has already been voted for. And that's a big thing, is that there are solutions, and a lot of people don't know that. And that's what Captains for Clean Water, that's basically what they're all about, is like, let's just do what we've already said we were going to do. Let's just use the money that's already been raised and make a big difference here.
Yeah, that's what I think. It's going to be good to work together with you, because when I had Jimmy on the show and we sat down and looked at the maps of the Everglades, and he started to show me how that fresh water was so important for the grass to grow. And then they put in these levees, if you will, roadways, like Alligator Alley, that just cut off a ton of and it was stuff that I had got, thank goodness I got to go to Florida. I got to see it. But on the other hand, being uneducated in this whole process, when I got to the Everglades, I thought it was so cool that there was these mangroves. And then Jimmy explained to me, there's not supposed to be these mangroves here, Dave. This is because we don't have our fresh water flowing through here. And then he explained to me how, and if you guys want to see that podcast, it's available over on YouTube and all the other places we podcast at, but he shows it. He lays the map out. He shows how he already has, like, the Captains for Clean Water, the culverts. They're willing to pay for the culverts. They're willing to dig the culverts. They're willing to put them in there, which all this stuff was like Chinese to me, because I thought it was such a bitchin' fishery for that 10 minutes I got to see it. I didn't understand the backstory, just like when I explained the sea lions to you. It's the same thing.
You just don't understand it when it's not there in front of you. But I'm telling you right now, there are a lot of people that live in Florida. There are a lot of people that live in the Florida Keys that never go to any of these impacted areas on the East Coast or the West Coast of Florida, and they don't understand what's going on there. Why are you getting fish kills? We don't have fish kills down here. We don't have any fresh water. And you guys are saying that you have too much fresh water. Even people that live in the Keys don't fully understand that because they've never seen it. People that live on just the East Coast don't understand what's going on the West Coast because they never go over there. Like, there are people in Florida that are very well traveled and fishermen that fish in all these different places. But honestly, when things are going right, you don't have to. Like, if you're in the Keys, you don't have any reason to travel 300 miles up the road and go fish somewhere else. Why would you? You're passing all of this great fishing to go maybe to try to find something that you don't even know that you heard existed, but you know it exists here. And then, I don't know. So there are people that are very well traveled. I don't want to say that, people in Florida don't go anywhere, but some people don't. They just stay in their area, and it's fine. It's great. It's amazing. But it is hard for some people to understand, even that are that close to it. And I'm sure that, people that live maybe inland in California and never go out to the ocean don't understand what's going on with the sea lions, because they just don't see it.
And the people on the East Coast, like I told you when I talked to April and Volky, and we were talking about how they eat the steelhead, and all of a sudden she was like, well, wait a minute. So it's not this cute little cuddly animal. And that's the same thing when Jimmy opened my eyes up to the Everglades problem. And I was like, holy mackerel. I would have never even known if I didn't have. So that's why your podcast, my podcast, and getting this word out to people that are outdoors people that want to be involved, but they don't even know what's going on out there. So this is going to be a great relationship you and I are going to have. It's going to go on for a very long time. We both have access to really cool people that can help, because you and I don't have a tenth of the answers, but we know the people that have the answers to the areas that we're going to.
I mean, that's the kind of the thing that I've gone into this whole podcasting world is like, I do have some information about the little small area that I fish and the few fish that we fish for down there. And maybe we're specialized in those things, and there's some techniques that I'm happy to share with people. But for the most part, the podcast for me has been a learning opportunity of, I don't know much about striped bass, so let's get some striped bass guys on here. I don't know much about, I want to learn more about all types of fishing, and so I'm right there with the audience. Like I want to know this too. But what I really get interested in is like you're really interested in the backstory of how somebody got involved in it as a kid. I am too, but I get really interested in the kind of the either how you started to make a living in it, or especially if you were making a living in something else, and that this just seemed like it was such a passion for you that you're going to quit your other job and become a fishing guide, or you're going to quit your other job and become a YouTuber or a podcaster, or you're going to quit your job and open up a fly shop. I love those stories. Like that's super cool to me.
Yeah, just being able to talk to all these people that we see in on the TV shows and on the podcasts and stuff, and to bring them onto our shows and then get to ask the questions that you and I want to know about. That's the cool thing about what you and I are doing. And I just really I dive deep into what they're talking about. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that this was going on. I had no idea that that was going on. Having the guys from Wicked Tuna come on the podcast and talk to me about what's going on there and all the things they're up against, and this wind turbine thing and all the different things that we don't see on the West Coast. And then I'm so happy that you brought me into your world now, and I'm going to take full advantage of it. I promise you that.
Well, let's do it.
So, gang, you can follow Tom. He has a great podcast. You can follow it. Elliot will throw it up on the screen. We're almost out of time here. If any of you have, we got like 8-9 minutes here. If any of you have a burning question that you would love to ask Tom, Elliot and I will throw it up on the screen for you. But right now, there you go. That's how you find Tom. That's how you find out what he's doing. That's his podcast right there. And then you can follow him on there. You can follow him on his Instagram page. We're both part of Waypoint. You can follow both of our podcasts on Waypoint. If you don't know, and you're going to share this with all your audience, so I'm just going to throw this out there. If you don't know who I am, I'm your saltwater guide. I do a live podcast 6 days a week. Think about that. I do a live podcast 6 days a week because I am super interested. It's my opportunity to get to know you guys. And so I love it. People go, isn't that a lot of work? No, because if I'm not doing it, I'm going to be watching it. So I love what I do, and I get to do what I love on a daily basis. I'm a fisherman by heart. I got to fish for a living for 50 plus years, but because of this podcast, it gets me to meet guys like Tom and Paul Hebert and Jimmy from Everglades Fish Company, and all these people that I watched from the outside for so long. And now they come on my podcast. I hope you all enjoy it. Watch me if you get a chance. Your Saltwater Guide, Monday through Friday at 12 o'clock, Saturdays at 9 a.m. Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Megaphone, Waypoint. We're everywhere, just like Tom. We're trying to be everywhere we can possibly be because this is so much fun. Dumb question. Why does it seem like Florida fishermen mostly use spinning reels and California guys mostly use conventionals?
That's not a dumb question. It's a question that I wonder myself. And when we were doing the redfish tournaments, I found the dividing line. It's somewhere between Louisiana and Texas, right in there, where that line between bait casters or conventional reels and spinning reels, that's where it exists, right there. And on one side of it, it's all conventional. On the other side, it's all spin. Both are very effective. I don't know. I mean, I don't know the answer to that. That is a soul searching question right there.
And I say this all the time on the podcast. Because you use a spinning rod, that doesn't make you wrong. Because I use a conventional reel, it doesn't make me wrong. It's what works for you, what you feel the most comfortable with in your hand, gang. Okay. And I'm not going to tell the guys because I've been there and I've watched you guys fish, and you guys are phenomenal at it. And you guys can work that rod and reel like nobody's business. I'll hand you my conventional reel, and you guys are like, what do I do with this? And the same thing happens on the West Coast. We don't know why it happened, gang. but we all were growing up at the same time doing the same thing. We were just using a different reel. There's no right or wrong way, though. At the end of the day, whatever feels the most comfortable for you, that's what you should do. So I don't know what's right, what's wrong. I just know if you're having fun, it's right. It's you're having fun, it's right. Don't try to reinvent it. Don't think that I'm not doing good because I only use conventional, and you're not doing good because you only use spinners. That's my thought on that whole thing.
Throw fly in there too. That's not better than either one of them either. It's just a different tool. They're all tools they're like golf clubs, in my opinion.
And my buddy Mike, he's on here making comment. We just got back from doing an Alaska trip in October, and I'll tell you, or September, and I'll tell you, he got to catch his first fish on the fly rod, and you couldn't get him out of the water. He was so fired up. He got to catch those little cutthroats up there, and there was zillions of them. And like you said, they're not the smartest fish in the world, but boy, they sure do make a lot of good fly fishermen.
Sure do.
It's a fun way. Gang, fishing is so incredibly fun. We need everybody, like Tom was saying, we need all of you involved at some point. We need help on the West Coast, especially right now. Another question one of my buddies had on here. Do you guys have MPAs out there in the Florida area where they're closing massive areas?
I don't know if we call them the same thing. There are areas that are closed areas, and they're called different things depending on which agency is running it, which agency is closing it. Like if it's NOAA or if it's the National Marine Sanctuary or these different things, we'll have different areas that are.
So do they close it forever?
My experience is that once it's closed, it's never opened again.
That's our experience out here.
I don't know if it'll I don't want to say never. I mean, I'm optimistic. I've seen some things and I'm probably wrong if I said that they're closed and never reopened. The one area that I'm thinking of has been closed and never reopened, even though it was promised. There's probably others that have. I don't know, but it's pretty frustrating. That's the one thing that I'm really, really passionate about is access. Like we can do whatever you want to about seasons, limits, bag limits, but we need to be able to go in there. Like when you say you can't go in there anymore, that's real bad. That's in my opinion, that's what we should fight more than anything else is access. We got to be able to have access to it.
Yeah, absolutely. We lost a ton. We lost a third of the California coastline 12 years ago to the MPAs, and they once they got it, they weren't done. They're back. They want more. They're taking more. They want it so bad. It's like one of their highest priorities is to close more of the California coastline to fishing. And there's an area, Laguna Beach, California. We talked about it on the podcast, me and you together. It's one of the most beautiful places on the planet Earth. When you come out to California, you and I are not going to be able to fish there. I'm blessed that my kids, they're 32 and 31, they got to fish in Laguna, and they'll never forget that, but it'll never open again. It's just so sad. And one other thing, and then we're going to wrap this up, gang. Our good buddy Matt Ryan asked, do you think the techniques, rigging, and stuff from Florida would work out here on the West Coast? Do you think the chicken rig, I don't even know what that is, but the chicken rig would work out here?
Chicken rig's like a multi-hook rig that, I mean, I don't know what you would fish for out there, but my experience is that if you can find a group of fishermen that have a technique that is very effective in their water, sometimes you might have to creatively think about it, downscale the tackle, upscale the tackle, but that will also be very effective somewhere else. Doesn't mean that it's going to be effective everywhere else, but if something is effective in one area, there is a high likelihood that you can find an application for that somewhere else. And that could be as like freshwater fly fishing. I mean, it seems like a wild thing, but I've seen it happen to where you take something that you've learned in freshwater fly fishing and you apply it to something like deep dropping for swordfish. It's like, well, this is, it's a rig with 2-pound test. How does that have anything to do with deep dropping? Well, it's like, well, it works here. If you did it with a 100-pound test, would that same kind of idea work over here. Now we might need to make the rig longer, shorter, bigger hooks, smaller hooks, different. I don't know, but it's kind of an idea. Like drop shotting from bass. Could you take drop shotting for bass and do it somewhere else with different tackle? And it's like, yeah, I mean, if it's an effective technique somewhere with enough creativity and enough kind of willingness to experiment, I do believe that you can find an application for that in other fisheries.
Well, there you go, gang. Tom, I want to thank you very much for being on the show with me today. Elliot Andrews, thank you so much for producing an epic show. I think we kept everybody super interested in what Tom had to say. Gang, thank you very much. Remember, tomorrow morning we'll be doing our live What's Biting on the Coast, what everybody's been catching this week. We'll probably talk a lot about what just happened in the Pacific Palisades and all the other fires. We'll talk about that for a little bit. And I want to thank you all for watching today and always being there for us. And remember, turn off the news. They're all lying. Only place you're going to get the truth is right here with me and Tom on the podcast. Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
See you guys.